know when we are streaming. Okay, we are now live on YouTube.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I would like to call this budget meeting to order. And I would ask if our town clerk, Olga Murray, could lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. Before we begin, we have two public hearings this morning, but I'd like to ask anyone who is planning to address the board regarding either of the scheduled public hearings on our budget to please raise the hand function on Zoom or to type into the question and answer line stating that you want to speak on the budget. And I'll give everyone a few moments to do that and would ask the town clerk if she would read the first hearing notice.
The first hearing notice. Notice is hereby given that the town board of the town of Islip will hold a public hearing to consider adopting a local law to override the tax levy limit established in General Municipal Law, Section 3C for the fiscal year 2021. Said hearing will be held on Thursday, November 5th, 2020 at 10:30 a.m. The town board meeting will be held electronically via Zoom webinar instead of an in-person public meeting and will be streamed live over the internet. Instructions on how to access the Zoom webinar and/or live stream are available on the town's website, www.islipny.gov. The format of this meeting is subject to change and may be held in person. Attendees should check the town website for instructions prior to the date of the meeting. A copy of the proposed law is available upon request from the office of the Islip Town Clerk located at 655 Main Street, Islip, New York, 11751. Public comment can be made at the town board meeting on November 5th, 2020, or by providing written comment prior to the date of the public hearing to the Islip Town Clerk at townclerk@islipny.gov. Town Board, Town of Islip, Olga H. Murray, Town Clerk.
Thank you very much, Olga. We have a number of people who have signed up to speak on the budget. I don't have anyone who signed up specifically for this local law. Is there anyone there, Caitlin, who has specifically outlined wishing to speak on this local law?
No, they've all spoken for item number 2.
Okay, great. So hearing none, I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing and adopt the local law.
Motion.
Motion by Councilman O'Connor, second by Councilman Cochran. All those in favor? Opposed?
Aye.
The local law is adopted. Madam Clerk, if you would please read the second hearing notice.
Yes. Today's second hearing. Notice is hereby given that the preliminary operating and capital budgets of the town of Islip for fiscal year beginning January 1, 2020 have been completed and filed in the office of the town clerk at Town Hall, New York. Further notice is hereby given that the town board of the town of Islip will hold a public hearing at 10:30 a.m. on the 5th day of November 2020 to consider adopting the 2021 operating and capital budgets. The town board meeting will be held electronically via Zoom webinar instead of an in-person public meeting and will be streamed live over the internet. Instructions on how to access the Zoom webinar and/or live stream are available on the town website, www.islipny.gov. The format of this meeting is subject to change and may be held in person. Attendees should check the town website for instructions prior to the prior to the date of this meeting. At such hearing, all citizens are invited to participate and provide the town board with written and oral comments concerning the town's entire proposed budget. The entire proposed budget can be inspected by the public from 8:30 a.m. until 5 p.m. Monday through Friday in the town clerk's office, town hall. Arrangements to view the budget can be made by contacting the town clerk's office at 224-5490 and/or by email at townclerk@islipny.gov. Town Board, Town of Islip, Olga H. Murray, Town Clerk.
Thank you very much. At this time, anyone who wishes to address the board with respect to either the operating budget or the capital budget certainly may do so. Everyone who is signed up has 3 minutes to speak. So Justin, if you would let the first speaker in, please.
Okay, we have Doris here. I'm going to allow Doris to talk. Doris, you are now able.
Good morning, Doris, and welcome. Doris, you have, Justin, can you unmute her?
Yeah, I've asked to unmute. She has, if she's on Zoom, she can,
Oh,
there she is.
Goes. Good morning, Doris, and welcome.
Good morning. I saw the article on Newsday, and I don't think you should raise the taxes. I don't think it's going to help anybody. Why don't we cancel some programs? I've used some town programs in the past, and a lot of people don't show up. I don't know what programs you were looking at, and I don't know what programs you are providing, but if it means to cut some senior craft class, let's do that instead of raising the taxes, because this is just the beginning. All our other taxes are going to be raised. We're going to be hit hard. So I know the school budget's going to go up. I just voted against that because the state aid, we're not going to get money from the state. They're broke. And that's all I have to say.
Ma'am, can we get your name and address, please, for the record?
I signed in and I gave all that information. Do you see that?
No, there's an oral record being made. There's a there's a stenographer taking down the oral minutes.
Oh, okay. So I got to do it twice. All right. Doris?
Sorry, Doris, and I thank you for your comments, and we certainly share your concerns about taxes going up, and this was not easy for us, but we'll get into that later. But in the meantime, if you could, Doris is from Central Islip, and if you could just give us your address.
59 McKinney, McKinney Street. Maybe listed as Avenue. I don't know. In Central Islip, New York, 11722.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doris, and thank you for weighing in.
Okay.
And just, I know you made reference to the Newsday article, so let me be clear about that. When they said taxes were going up 6%, it was a little disingenuous because, first of all, they rounded it up. It is 5.8 with all of the cuts that we have made. But also, too, it is of the town portion, not your entire tax bill. And that translates to a little over $33 for the year on the town portion. Again, thank you, Doris. And Justin, if you could let the next speaker in, please.
Sure, we have a Jeffrey. Let's see here. Actually, Jeffrey might have dropped out. Caitlin, do you see Jeffrey?
I'm checking right now. And
He was here. It looks like, yeah, it looks like he left. Well, we do have a caller, and this might be either Nadine or Susan. So I'm going to go ahead and allow the caller to talk. And if you could state your name.
You have to unmute.
And if you're calling in, it's *6 on your phone to unmute if you cannot find it.
So if you can hear me, 707-5474, if you could just hit *6 to unmute so that we can hear you. Justin, do you want to try the next speaker?
Looks like we have everyone else who signed up isn't here. So that would be it. If the caller is not willing to speak or not willing to speak, then that's all.
All right. Well, those who had contacted us, Susan Redmond, Jeffrey Cadlack, and Nadine Meyer. If you can hear us, we certainly would love to hear from you. All right,
Those
why
attendees
don't,
aren't here.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Justin.
Those attendees aren't here, so it's either the
Okay.
caller, yeah.
All right. Well, I'll go on to my overview, and perhaps in the interim, someone will come back. Otherwise, we will just proceed. But as we all know, we are meeting here today to hopefully adopt the 2021 operating budget and the capital budget, which, as was previously mentioned and advertised, was filed with the town clerk on September 15th. It's interesting. This morning, I received a phone call, and the first thing the lady said was, I don't want to see a tax increase. And guess what? I don't want a tax increase, and I know I speak for the members of the town board. We would all love not to have a tax increase. But there comes a time that you need to be responsible and you need to do the right thing. And this budget maintains our commitment to good fiscal stewardship to our residents, despite the challenges that we have been confronted with in 2020. And no one has been able to escape and not be affected by what has been happening in 2020. And also the uncertainty of where we're headed in 2021. We have made every effort to be responsible, to not decimate services, to lay off employees, as some municipalities have been forced to do, and certainly not to kick the can down the road. Unfortunately, the town of Islip has received no help in terms of direct federal funding. And that was something else someone had commented to me, well, why don't you get federal aid? We tried. Unlike the town of Hempstead, they received $133 million in direct CARES Act funding. Instead, the allotment that would have included the town of Islip went directly to Suffolk County. $257 million was given to Suffolk County to offset the devastating financial impact of this unprecedented pandemic to municipalities. However, the county has not shared any of this funding with any of the towns or villages, despite our collective requests to the county for assistance. All of this, combined with the increases in costs due to the pandemic, has put us in the position to originally propose a budget, and departments were instructed. We wanted requests to come in at 0%, and they did. However, if we had gone forward with that, it would have been a $42 annual increase across the three major funds with an 8% increase. However, working with the controller and the department heads, with input and assistance from all members of the town board, we were able to slash that proposed increase to a little over $33 annually, less than $3 a month, which translates to 5.8%. We really, really understand that these times are hard for so many of us, and that any increase may present a burden. But please know that this decision was not reached lightly. In order to avoid layoffs or cutting services and amenities that our residents expect and deserve, the reality of recent events and funding cuts and revenue losses made this necessary. These cost increases are the results of shortfalls occurring as a result of the COVID pandemic, extraordinary cleanup costs due to Storm Isaias. You know, it was like 2020 was the year that kept on giving. If it wasn't bad enough that we were dealing with the increased costs because of COVID, then we had the storm. We had 9,000 tons of debris removed from our roads with all the associated tipping fees. Then the state says that they're cutting state aid, 20% in highway funding and aid to municipalities. That alone translates to nearly $1 million. Then on top of that, the state informs us they're increasing pension costs and healthcare costs. It's important to note that despite all these challenges, we have been able to maintain our enviable AAA bond rating with a stable outlook. This credit rating allows us to continue to do important infrastructure improvements to our roadways, parks, beaches, and more at a borrowing rate that is very like pennies on the dollar. Thanks to this bond rating, we are certainly in a far better position than many other municipalities, and the county is a perfect case in point. This affirmation of our fiscal policies has enabled us to refinance some debt to save money at an unprecedented rate of 0.29%. And again, Newsday reported it erroneously at 2.9%, but in actuality, it is 0.29%. In spite of the unprecedented pandemic, Islip's Airport, Long Island MacArthur continued their operations and remains self-sufficient using no taxpayer dollars. We will continue our steadfast commitment to sound and appropriate economic development, all the time focused on preserving a good quality of life for all our residents. Everyone involved worked diligently with the town board to keep this budget as cost-effective as possible. As supervisor, I am really proud of what the town has been able to accomplish this year, especially during these difficult and uncertain times. And we remain committed to the continued good stewardship of our town's finances, no matter what challenges we face. And I would ask, I'd like to thank Controller Ludwig and his team for all of their effort working so closely with the members of the town board. And Joe, if you would give us an overview of the budget that we have before us.
Sure. Good morning, Madam Supervisor, members of the town board. My name is Joseph Ludwig, Controller for the town of Islip, 401 Main Street, Islip, New York. Madam Supervisor, the wonderful thing about following you on these budget hearings is that you usually do most of the legwork for me and you leave very little for me to still talk about. But as you mentioned, this was probably the hardest budget we've ever had to work on. And I know I say that on many occasions, but between the uncertainties that are going into next year, and we all are knocking on wood and hoping that the COVID issue is going to cease and desist, but honestly, we don't know. And there are revenues that we would normally be able to anticipate that we can't anticipate for next year. There are expenses that we have to kind of factor on having to have because we'd rather have that money instead of not being able to have the money. When you roll the whole thing together, we really only increased the expenditures for the town by less than 1.5 points, townwide, all funds. And again, that's a grand testament to the commissioners who understood the position that we were in. And as you had mentioned, they had to come in with as close to a zero as possible. And every commissioner did everything they could to comply. And that's why we were able to get the number down as low as we could. As you mentioned, Supervisor, no one wants to raise the taxes. This is not the first go-to spot. This process starts in June. It runs all July and all of August. And that's my team sitting with all the different commissioners. And then in September, it's me chatting with you folks and letting you know where we're at and what we've cut and what repercussions would happen if we needed to cut more. I know there was talk at one point of trying, what would it cost if we would be able to be tax cap compliant? We would have to cut $2 to $3 million worth of services. We really just kind of ran into a buzzsaw of horrible conditions this year. And, unfortunately, this is really where we kind of got stuck with what we had to deal with. As you mentioned, Supervisor, and again, thank you to all the board members who had good insight and good conversations. And not to embarrass anybody, but Councilman O'Connor, A++ to your age, she was fantastic. We were able to get the number down, as you mentioned, Supervisor, from just below 8 to 5.8%. Not perfect, but it's the best that we can do. it really took a full team effort to get the number down to where it's at. It's an increase, and unfortunately, there is no way to hide that, but it's as good of a job as we could have done.
Well, Joe, I want to thank you for that, and I appreciate what you've said, and I appreciate you going over the process, because it is months and months that this goes on. Every single town board member sat with the controller, went over the budget line by line, and every single town board member had input that helped us bring those numbers down. And it really helps having, that different perspective. You get focused in on one area, but when someone else looks at it, you may have overlooked it. And that's what happened in this instance. Everyone really, really contributed. And I really can't thank you enough. And I know I speak for Joe and his team. It truly, truly was a joint effort. And Joe mentioned that the expenses increased 1.47%. And the tax cap increase, the allowable increase is 1.56%. So we actually, had it not been for all of these things out of our control, we would have had no problem being tax cap compliant, and that's the real shame of all of this. But in some respects, we are very, very lucky that all of these years we have been doing our due diligence, have not kicked the can down the road. So it enabled us to weather this storm and present what we feel is a fiscally responsible budget that won't hurt us over the course of, the course of the year, as we try to do what's right by the taxpayer. Are there any comments or questions from the board?
I have just a couple, but I'll defer to my more senior colleagues if they have anything they want to say.
I guess not, Junior. You can go.
Okay, thanks. Recognizing my place. Joe, I just want to, if I can, kind of turn back the curtain a little bit and talk a little bit about the process. So you mentioned it starts in June or so with the meeting with all the commissioners, and they present a projection. We're talking now today, we're discussing revenues and expenses for 2021.
Right.
So we were dealing with all of the issues of 2020 that dealt us, and yet we're trying to forecast and give our best projections as to what 2021 is going to bring. So those meetings took place with all of the commissioners back over a course of June and several months, correct?
Yeah, so the whole process, like I said, starts in June. That's when my office sends out the memos to all the commissioners, and that they have to start working on their budgets. The budget due back to my office, usually first week of July. And then my office spends basically the rest of July going through all their requests. I will say this year was probably one of the easiest years to review because the commissioners had that mandate of no increase, and they truly did comply. But as we hit into early August, that's when we sit with all the commissioners and we whittle the number down even below what they had submitted, because just because they submitted it, it's their wish list, and they have to come up with that wish list in July of 2020 to try to figure out what they're going to need for all of 2021.
So as board members, sometimes we get feedback from our residents about the process, and that they're curious about the process. So the process is very much dictated by New York State town law. The tentative budget gets presented to the town board, and in this instance, it did at our September 15th town board meeting, right? The town clerk presents the budget, and at that point, it's the tentative budget, right?
Correct. So the way the state code reads is that the tentative budget has to be presented to the town. It's a weird way that they put it. It has to be in the clerk's office no later than September 30th, but it also has to be presented to the board at a public meeting on or before October 5th.
So it was presented to this town board on September 15th at the town board meeting, and that's this 302-page bound document that we all get, right?
Correct. Yes.
And so when the town budget gets filed with the clerk, it then transitions from the tentative budget to the preliminary budget, right?
After that October 5th date. So really, as long as we presented it to the board, at that point, it morphs into the preliminary budget.
And the preliminary budget this year called for, I'm just going to use percentages just for sake of conversation.
Sure.
It called for a 7.8% increase across all funds, right?
Correct. No,
Okay.
I take it back. No, it was a 7.8% increase on the three major funds.
Three major funds. Okay, and then the town board has an opportunity to participate and get involved in the process. And I know we all do. And in this year, my office, as you mentioned, we met with you on October 7th, and we presented you with a 10-page spreadsheet of all the different lines that we had some questions and issues about, right?
Yep. Probably
And
the most
within-
thorough review of a budget I've ever seen.
Within 48 hours, I think you got back to us with the responses saying that there were 3 missed revenue lines that lowered the tax levy by $480,000. So hopefully, I know my colleagues add much value to the process. Hopefully I did as well this year, right?
Absolutely. And again, just to, that September 15th date you mentioned, the benefit of it being that early is that it does give the board really an additional 2 weeks to go through the budget. And as you pointed out, this year that was essential and critical to have that happen.
And, at the meetings, it's not only the line by line review of it, but you also educate us and present to us as the town board what I like to call, and what you've become probably all too used to and sick of, is the view from 40,000 feet. What's going on? What are the impacts? Why are we faced with this, and all of those things, right?
Correct. Many, many years ago, somebody had asked me what was the best thing about my job and the worst thing about my job. And he said, it's simple. It's the budget. And it's the same answer for both questions. And they looked at me very strange. And I said, you have to understand, the budget consumes my entire summer. I have no life. I am that accountant during tax season. It's horrible. But on the bright side, I know a little bit about everything that's going on in the town. And that type of information and knowledge is so helpful and so useful because it helps answer questions that come down the road. You know who's doing what. There's an interaction between the board and the different commissioners. And it just makes it for such an easier understanding as to what we're doing going forward.
So at the end of the process, and I know there was a lot of hard work and the supervisor has addressed it. At the end of the process now, we're here today to adopt a budget. We were presented with a preliminary budget that had roughly a 7.8% increase. And through a lot of hard work by a lot of people, including my colleagues, including your staff, including the supervisor's staff, we are scheduled to vote today to adopt a budget that goes from 7.8% back when it was presented to us on September 15th to 5.8%. Is that accurate?
That's correct. You nailed it.
Thank you. Thank you. I have nothing else, Madam Supervisor.
Thank you, Councilman O'Connor. Are there any other comments or questions for Joe at this time? Okay, then hearing none, our public portion is concluded, and I'd call upon the controller. I call upon a motion to approve the adjustments that have been made to the 2021 preliminary budget and adopt the 2021 operating budget. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Motion by Councilman O'Connor, second by Councilwoman Bergen. All those in favor? Opposed? Approved. Again, I really can't thank everyone enough. It was referred to, but to Councilwoman Bergen comments on the healthcare costs and everyone's input, Councilman Mullen, certainly Councilman O'Connor and Cochran. We couldn't have gotten to where we are today without everyone's help on this, and I really, truly appreciate that. We will now move to the capital budget. And just for a little bit of background, the departmental requests that came in, and again, Joe will go over it in more detail, totaled nearly $40 million. And, we're really conflicted with the cost of borrowing being so low. This is the time you want to do everything, but with the uncertainty of what, is confronting us with COVID, we really, really have to be judicious. So every project was thoroughly scrutinized. We were able to make appropriate cuts, postpone some projects to future years, bringing this year's capital budget to a little over $30 million, which is $10 million less than was originally requested and $8 million less than 2020. But even with those cuts, I want to assure everyone that we are continuing to make the needy and necessary infrastructure improvements. We're moving forward with tree removal. We've got a lot of blighted trees that will cause more damage if they're not removed. We've committed $9 million to paving, to continue our paving across the town, $2 million in drainage improvements, parking lot pavings, improvements to playgrounds, and also much needed building improvements. And we have been very aggressive in trying to secure funding wherever possible, state aid, grant funding wherever possible. And we have been able to do that, so that has been helpful. But without any further ado, Joe, if you would touch on some of the points of the capital program.
Sure. Thank you again, Madam Supervisor. The capital program is very different than the operating budget that we just discussed, in the sense that the capital program is just a plan. It is a plan that we can adjust on the fly as we need to, but it kind of is a good way to give an indication as to what may or may not be coming down the pike for 2021. Madam Supervisor, as you mentioned, the original capital request by the departments, and again, Councilman O'Connor, back to your point, they need to figure out in July what projects they think they're going to do for 2021. It's not an easy task. So very often their requests are a little bloated. And then when we look at, okay, can you reasonably get to some of the projects? No, we're not going to get to that this year. Some of the projects are easy to push off. Some of them, as I like to say, are above my pay grade. They are more supervisor decisions, and are we going to do this project and not do that project? As you mentioned, we did bring the number down from 40 million to just over 30 million. Again, there are very few wonderfully new projects within the capital budget. It is the meat and potatoes that we do year in, year out. It's computers, it's roads, it's drainage, it's trees. Probably the biggest department that had an increase is the Department of Environmental Conservation, with all the different sites that they have. The bright spot to the town is that if we did float the debt for those projects, that debt service is reimbursed to us by the Islip Resource Recovery Agency. So it really turns out to be a zero impact to the town. The only other fun project, I guess we can call, is, and let me just make sure I have it right, is within Parks and Recreation. And I believe we have a grant for this, is we are doing a turf field up in Central Islip. I believe there's a local matching grant for that. So that would be our contribution piece to it. That is really the non-year in, year out project that we have in this budget. So that was the 75,000 foot view. And by all means, I can certainly go into any different department or any additional projects you guys may want to know about.
Thank you, Joe. Anyone have any questions or comments for Joe on the capital budget? And again, it is a plan. This will be coming back to us before any appropriations are made. So it really isn't committing any funds at this point.
Correct.
Any questions, comments? Hearing none, I would like a motion to adopt the 2021 capital budget.
I'll make that motion, Supervisor.
Motion by Councilman Bergen, thank you. And a second?
Second.
By Councilman Cochran. All those in favor? Opposed? The 2021 capital budget is approved, and I'd make a motion to close the public hearing. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilman Mullen. All those in favor? Opposed? That concludes our scheduled public hearings. And do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Councilman Bergen. Second by Councilman Cochran. All those in favor? Opposed? I would just ask everyone to please stay healthy and safe. Wear your mask, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Meeting adjourned.